Okay, hello guys, it's Dragonster.
Back in high school, I took a mysteries and mythology type class, or something like that. I don't remember the name of the class. It basically just had to do with real life mysteries and creepy shit. I was into that kind of stuff. I was taking the class with a good friend, who I'll call Ben for this story. The teacher of the class took us on a field trip to a nearby abandoned village with an unknown past. The village was built in the early 1900s, but seems as though it had been quickly abandoned shortly after it was built. The bus ride there was about 20 minutes. All of us were glued to the bus windows as we pulled up some sketchy-looking, decrepit road cutting through dense forest. The road eventually led to a clearing. We were there. We stepped out onto the road, which had grass growing through the cracks. The grass surrounding was almost knee-high. Then there were the buildings. The tall, archaic brick buildings with the boarded-up windows all gave off such chilling vibes. The teacher lined all 20 of us up, counted heads, and then began leading the way. The point of this little field trip was to use the so-called skills we learned in class to see if we could put anything together about why the village may have been abandoned so long ago. Some of the buildings had holes in the walls to serve as entryways. There were even holes in the ground next to some of the buildings, seemingly dug to get into the basements of some of the buildings, which seemed creepy. There was one building, though. It stood taller than any of the others. It just intrigued me the most. While the teacher was leading the group towards the village church, Ben and I decided to sneak off on our own to look for anything interesting. When we walked off in the direction of the tallest building, we saw a hole in the ground. It was dug by the back door of the building, which had been sealed off. In the hole was a ladder, which led down to the concrete floor below. We both looked at each other and knew we had to do it. Ben climbed down first, then me. Luckily, this was just around the time Apple started putting flashlights on their phones, so we had a source of light. It was creepy down there. There were a couple of beer bottles, one graffiti tag on the wall, and dusty wooden planks everywhere. There was a wooden stairway which led up to complete darkness, since all windows and doors had been sealed shut from above. We had already gone as far as to enter the building, so we figured we'd go up the stairs too. I went first, and with each step, the creakiness of the 100-year-old wood made me feel as if I was going to fall through each and every step. Ben followed suit. This floor of the building was very tight. It seemed like there were many openings going off into different, smaller rooms. It was so dark in there, you would never even guess it was daytime. Ben and I were honestly starting to get creeped out in there, and agreed to go back outside.
Who's this by?
But just then, there was a noise in one of the tiny rooms. Like a big rock hitting the concrete floor. A normal instinct would be to run, but Ben and I froze, locked eyes for a moment, then both tiptoed over to the opening of the room. We shined the lights into the room, and ran. We ran back down the stairs and then up the rusty ladder back outside. We caught up to the group out of breath. We didn't say anything, though, to avoid getting in trouble. One of our classmates asked us what was wrong. We told him we snuck into one of the buildings, and in one of the rooms, when we shined the light into it, we saw 3 guys standing maybe 10 feet away from the doorway, facing Ben and I in a weird formation, as if they were waiting for us.
I would've slapped that.
As we continued following the group, we paid extra attention to the tall building we entered from the distance. And before leaving, we saw a person's face at one of the higher level windows that had not been boarded up.
Shoot.
We never told the teacher in fear of getting in trouble. We didn't know what to think. Were those just homeless people living in there? Were they gang members in hiding? Ben freaks me out with his theory. He says they were ghosts of the people who once lived in the town. Still, the way the 3 guys were just hauntingly standing there so calmly, staring at us the moment we peeked our heads through that doorway, I still can't get that image out of my head. I may go back to that village one day, just to prove Ben's idea wrong.
So we're gonna try to check another one. Ooh, Llama Arts and Mr. Nightmare. So let's check that one. Hitchhiking stories.
3 months after I turned 16 in 2005, I got my first car, a 99 Toyota Camry.
Oh.
On a warm Saturday night, when my friend Alex invited me over to one of his friend's big parties, I knew I wouldn't be in a condition to drive the Camry home afterward. So we carpooled with Alex's girlfriend, Brianna. We lived in the countryside of Virginia, meaning less big parties, meaning when there was a big party, it was a huge deal and everyone would go. We lived about 5 to 10 minutes away from this kid's house. I knew where he lived as I was acquainted with him, but not exactly friends. The whole ride there, we took the same 2-lane highway type road through the woods, and this kid's house was actually on this road further down. At certain points on this road, there were a few houses on either side, and then it would just go back to being a long, empty highway again. The house was tiny, like a lot of houses around the area, but the party was held outside anyways, since its closest neighbors were relatively far away, and noise wasn't an issue. I'll skip most of the party up until the point that Brianna, who was supposed to be our designated driver, had to suddenly leave for a small family emergency. Alex said it was fine and that we'd find a ride home. Well, fast forward another few hours and another few drinks, and I could barely even walk straight. I checked my watch, and it was like 2 in the morning. I figured it was time to go. I started looking for Alex, but I couldn't find him anywhere. In fact, it seemed like everybody I knew had already left. I could barely even think straight, but I was still furious at the fact that Alex could have actually left without me. I asked to use the party host's phone and dialed Alex's home number. After 2 tries, I gave up and then realized I shouldn't wake his family up. So, literally not knowing what else to do, I dizzily stepped out onto the road and began walking back home. I knew this walk would take anywhere from half an hour to an hour in my condition. Maybe after 15 minutes of walking down the road, the slight shine of car headlights on the road was fading in from behind me. Jumping for joy inside, I lifted up my arm and stuck out my thumb. As the car neared, it slowed down and came to a stop right next to me. The man driving the '98 Ford Explorer rolled down the window and asked where you headed. I told him my house was just down the road and beyond a right turn, probably slurring my words beyond comprehension. He chuckled and told me to hop in. I thanked him and joyously hopped into the truck. I was exhausted, and I remember completely disregarding things the guy was asking me because I was so close to just passing out. And that's what happened. The memories of being in that truck turned to a fog, as I'm sure I passed out. The next thing I remember, I woke up still in the moving truck. The guy looked at me and laughed, but didn't say anything. I looked around and realized the road we were on wasn't familiar. I nervously asked, where are we going? He then said, so what were you doing out this late anyway? As the man answered my very straightforward question with another irrelevant question, the sobering reality of the situation hit me. You can let me out anywhere, I told the man. The man responded with a firm no. I felt like throwing up as he said that. No, I really actually felt like I was going to throw up. I started to gag as I felt more and more nauseous by the second. The man took his eyes off the road to look at me, and that's when I thought of the perfect distraction. I turned in his direction as I continued to gag, and he started to kind of lean away and slow down the car. Thankfully, I drank as much as I did, because I finally threw up and made a point of doing it all over the man's lap. The man yelled in frustration and stopped the car, and that's when I took it upon myself to run for my life into the woods and duck behind a few bushes. The man came following into the woods with a flashlight, and on 2 separate occasions, he shined the light straight over me without noticing. Eventually, I heard his footsteps walk even further into the woods past me. That was when I ran back to his truck, but unfortunately, he was smart enough to lock it. By some miracle, I saw another car approaching in the distance, and I ran out into the middle of the street, waving my arms like a lunatic. The car tried to avoid me, but I wouldn't let it. They were forced to stop, and I yelled at them to help me before they came back. Once I told them that I was kidnapped by the man who was driving that Ford Explorer, the driver agreed to give me a lift. Not to the police station or anything, but to my house. I made it back safely, where I couldn't thank the driver enough. I immediately woke up my parents and told them. My dad wanted to know if I got his tag number, and then I felt like punching myself in the face. I failed to get the simplest information from the guy that would have allowed me to actually properly report him. All I knew was that he drove a faded blue '99 Ford Explorer. I made sure to give Alex a piece of my mind, and part of me always held a grudge against him ever since, just for abandoning me at a party without telling me. I haven't seen him in 4 years now, however, and this was actually the first time I even thought about this incident for almost a year now. As time goes on, even the worst of memories may start to fade.
Scary.
But after writing this to share with the internet, it's once again fresh in my mind.
School lockdown stories.
It was a typical boring day in calculus, only it was Friday, 7th period, meaning the week was almost over and spring break would finally be upon us. So everybody was getting antsy in their seats, I could tell. We didn't have a test that day like a lot of my friends did with their other teachers, so our teacher in the middle of class just decided to start playing games with us on Sporkle.com. He was a very laid-back teacher like that. As we were doing some brand logo quiz on Sporkle, I remember the exact moment it happened. Right after my friend answered a question, I remember the exact answer too, Adidas. The dean's voice came through the loudspeaker. He sounded panicked and frantic as he told all the teachers this was not a drill and to go into lockdown. I actually got the chills, and I got goosebumps on my arms as our usually laid-back teacher too seemed panicked as he ran to turn off the lights and ushered us to the back corner of the room. We all sat in silence for about 2 minutes, and then the usual buzzing that came from a panel in the back of the room ceased, indicating that the school must have cut all the power. We all looked at each other, realizing this must be serious. A few more minutes of waiting later, we heard a man screaming at the top of his lungs coming down the hallway. 2 girls in the class actually started crying, which made all of us even more scared. As the screaming got closer to the classroom, the lunatic-sounding man started banging on the lockers while screaming, "I'll kill all of you." It was at that moment that I started to fear for my life. My teacher shushed us as we all looked at each other to see our peers' reactions. The banging then moved from the lockers to our classroom door. And that's when one of the crying girls screamed no. The banging on the door only grew worse as the man started screaming, "Open up." 2 of the girls in the class were crying out loud now. It felt like an eternity that man was pounding at the door. But eventually, he finally continued down the hallway, screaming like a mentally insane person, until we could not hear him anymore. I'd say 10 minutes later, though it felt like half an hour given the situation, the dean came back on the loudspeaker explaining the situation, which was surprising for him to do. He explained that some apparently mentally unstable person entered the building and assaulted the woman sitting at the front desk, causing her to flee the building screaming, and staff wasn't sure if the man was armed or not. Now this was before the school had cameras or could afford proper security, so the school was wide open to something like this happening. The staff had done a sweep of all the hallways and classrooms and couldn't find him, so the dean instructed the teachers to resume teaching but to keep all the doors locked, and to not let any students leave for any reasons. The most disturbing part, however, is that one of the janitors working the night shift found the man sleeping in one of the storage closets near the back end of the school. and according to rumors that were spread by my peers, sticking out of his pocket was a .44 Magnum. The janitor must have done something stupid to wake him up, for example, leaving the closet door open, because by the time a police officer could arrive on the scene, the man was gone. My entire class, as far as I know, to this day, has no idea if this man was ever found, but I like to think that right now, he's being given the proper help that he needs.
I was scared.
I'm 27 years old. I live alone in a rural town in Virginia, about 2 blocks away from my parents. My parents are both in their 60s, and my mom has become a very worrisome woman in her old age. Sometimes she walks over uninvited and lets herself in, since I had regrettably given her a key, which can get a bit annoying. Like if I would be out really late on weekends at a bar or with women, I would sometimes come home to my mom sitting in the living room waiting, worried sick. I know you may just think, oh my god, that's crazy, why not just put your foot down and tell her to stop? Well, because you don't know my mom. It's very hard to describe her, but she's the kind of worrisome, innocent little lady that you just can't bring yourself to go against. And I hate to mention, she also has mild dementia. Anyway, this was Saturday night. I think it was around 2 in the morning. I was at a nearby club with a group of college friends, really the only place to hang out in this boring town, and I was getting ready to head home. I said goodbye to all my friends and walked the 3 blocks it took to get back to my house. I walked up my front stoop in my drunken haze and dug my hand in my pocket for my keys. When I grabbed the doorknob, I realized it was unlocked. My mom was here again. I quietly opened and shut the front door, locking it behind me. I put my keys on the kitchen counter and found a note written in my mom's handwriting saying, "You forgot this at our house, next to the box of half-eaten cake my parents didn't want." I didn't see my mom anywhere, so I assumed she must have gone upstairs to sleep in the guest bed until I got back, which is something she would commonly do as well. Then I heard footsteps upstairs, confirming it, and that's when I sighed once again. 27 years old, almost 3 in the morning, and she still has to wait up and treat me like a child. I ran upstairs to check the guest bed, empty, along with all the bathrooms. I was afraid Mom was having one of her episodes due to her condition, so I ran to the phone to call my dad. After 4 rings, my dad picked up in a groggy voice, asking what the hell is the matter. After I told him that I heard Mom wandering around upstairs in my house, there was a short pause, and then he said, "That's not possible, she's sleeping right next to me." My mouth fell open as I turned my head to face the dark upstairs, and just barely by the light provided by the kitchen, I could see a head peering around from the corner at the top of the stairs, looking down at me. I screamed into the phone as I ran out the front door and down the street to my parents' house, explaining to my father on the way. About halfway there, my dad told me, "Alright, I'm gonna call the cops," and hung up.
You should have brought his freaking keys.
I made it to my parents' house, where my mom was already waiting at the door, worried sick. My mom explained that she did come over to clean my kitchen a little bit and to bring over the cake they didn't want. 2 police cars pulled up in front of my parents' house, where they escorted me and my dad down the street to my house. 1 officer stayed outside with us, while 2 others went inside to investigate. It felt like 15 minutes before they came back outside and said it was clear. They checked the crawl space, the attic, everything. There was really nothing for me to report, other than the door was left unlocked and I saw the outline of a head upstairs before I ran for it. Still, I didn't feel safe sleeping in there that night, so I went back to my parents' house. Me and my dad are certain that my mom simply forgot to lock the door when she left, as her memory has been getting worse over the past few months. My dad has been stopping her from coming over alone from now on, which makes me both sad but also relieved. Some nights I still get paranoid that whoever was in my house that night never left, and is still hiding in here somewhere. My name is Ethan, and I'm a photographer. I took a trip last year with my wife to the Colorado mountains for an art project. My wife is also an avid skier, so she talked me into adding skiing into the trip. We had the option to book a room at a ski resort or rent out a private log cabin. The second one seemed more romantic, so I picked that one. Plus, it didn't hurt that it was cheaper. The cabin was nothing luxurious or anything. It was a single-floor, 4-room little thing. A 2-person bedroom, a small living room, a kitchen, and a bathroom. It may have been small, but the actual idea of being secluded in a warm log cabin during a blizzard was amazing. However, the storm was interfering with the cable signal, so we didn't have much to do this one particular evening. It was just starting to get dark out at this point, but there was still a decent amount of light outside, so I thought it would be perfect for getting a few shots and videos in the blizzard for backgrounds and wallpapers. I told my wife I'd be back within 10 minutes and slipped on my boots and coat. The moment I stepped outside and shut the door, I noticed footsteps leading up to the door in the snow that had blown under the wooden awning. I could see the prints doubled, as whoever left them there turned and went the opposite direction. I was freaked the fuck out, but I wasn't about to go inside and scare my wife. I decided to give in to my curiosity and followed the prints to the right side of the cabin. Right away, I noticed that they led to the bedroom window. My heart froze in fear when I saw this. I could see my wife sitting on the bed using her iPad. She noticed me, and I waved. She laughed. I continued to follow the footprints around the cabin to the other side. They led to the living room window on the other side. Someone was stalking us, but how long ago was the question? I found myself standing there for a good minute asking myself if I should follow the footprints anymore. For whatever reason, I decided I would. They were now leading away from the cabin. I knew I was following the prints to where this person was going, not coming from, simply by the boot marks. I followed the prints away from the opening and into the trees. That was where I saw him. A man wearing a black coat facing a tree, slouched down looking at the ground. He was still as a statue, and I could see the snow piling up on his hood and shoulders. I froze in my tracks, trying not to make a sound. I would have thought to ask him if he needed help otherwise, but this guy was just standing there not doing anything, like some kind of deranged freak. I started to gradually move backwards without even turning around, making sure this man didn't turn around or notice me. When I got at a visual distance, I turned around and stomped through the snow back to the cabin. When I slammed the door shut, my wife came over to see what was wrong. I saw worry in her eyes. I guess she saw the worry in mine. She knew I saw something, and after a few minutes of harassment, I finally told her what I saw. She immediately started packing her things, telling me we're leaving right away. I told her no, we're not going anywhere. I would not get a refund for leaving early, and I wasn't about to up and leave just because some weird guy was walking around outside. She made a point of locking both locks on the door and making sure all of the windows were sealed shut. For the rest of the night, we read stuff on our iPads. I reviewed the pictures and videos I had taken so far. We turned out the lights early as there wasn't much else to do. What if he's still out there? I remember my wife asking me. There's no way he's still out there, I then assured her. Listening to the wind blowing outside, along with the small flakes of snow hitting the windows, was strangely relaxing, and I knew I'd be able to fall asleep quickly. Except if it wasn't for the knock at the bedroom window. We were both still awake, and we both knew it was a knock from a person. I ushered my wife out of bed and out into the living room without turning on any lights. There was nothing to use as a weapon whatsoever. Our only option was to run before something might happen. I told my wife we'd have to forget our luggage and make a dash for the Jeep. We slipped on our boots and coats in the dark in a matter of seconds, and when we heard a knock at the living room window from the opposite side of our car, we took that opportunity to run. I pressed the unlock button, so grateful I chose to have remote locks on my Wrangler, and we hopped in. The car started with ease, and as soon as the headlights flashed on, the man was standing facing the log cabin on our side now. Not a window, just facing the wall of the cabin in the same position I had seen him in earlier, as if he were hiding his face. We drove to the nearby ski resort without much trouble in the Jeep. We stayed there for the night and went back the next day to the log cabin to collect our things we left behind. He wasn't there. This story took place about 5 years ago on Christmas Eve night. It was around 1 in the morning, and I had just finished placing presents under the tree. I went upstairs to brush up and everything, then came back downstairs to the kitchen to get a glass of water before bed. My son Jake, who was 4 at the time, was standing by the stairs leading to the basement. I asked him what he was doing up so late. He pointed down the stairs and said, "Santa." I picked him up and carried him back to his room. I took a glass of water and went to bed. I woke up around an hour later to my son running down the hall outside my room. I sighed and got out of bed. As I was going down the stairs, I saw Jake by the tree looking at presents. Then he ran past me into the basement stairs again. He pointed down the stairs again. This time I looked down the stairwell, and my heart dropped as I saw a black figure sitting on the bottom step. I almost screamed, but I somehow held it in. I pulled my son quietly away from the basement door and closer to the front door of the house. I moved my hand away from my son's mouth to reach for the lock on the doorknob. I tried to pull the door open as quietly as possible, but it was pointless. The squeaky hinges let out the usual ear-piercing screeches, and I cringed in my mouth and eyes as I did. Suddenly, there were heavy stomps coming from up the basement stairs. I screamed and pushed open the storm door and practically threw Jake outside. I shut both doors behind us and we ran to the neighbor's house. I rang the doorbell as fast as possible, probably 30 times before they answered. After that, we went inside and stayed there and waited for the police. Whoever that person was gone though, as determined after the police conducted a thorough investigation of the house. I ended up lying to Jake, telling him that actually was Santa Claus. But a few years later, he remembered the incident and became a little more wise to what actually happened.
Let me guess, they saw it again. Nope.
That was small.
That was. After this, I'm gonna end the video. It's like past 22 minutes.
When I was a kid, my parents would sometimes bring me down to my aunt and uncle's place to stay for the weekend. Mainly, I'd spend time playing with my 2 cousins who were around the same age as me. They lived on a small farm with plenty of open space, and we could run around doing pretty much whatever we wanted. If we thought we could get away with it, the 3 of us would sometimes cross over to the neighboring farm about half a mile away. It had been abandoned for decades, with a scattering of derelict buildings and other structures still standing on the property, just begging to be explored. This was of course a gold mine for 3 adventurous young boys such as ourselves, especially after my cousins told me stories about the deaths that took place in the house. It was pretty classic fare. Man goes crazy, axe murders his entire family, hangs himself, returns every night as an angry spirit looking for new victims. Good, grisly stuff. Even at that age, I knew they were probably making it up, or at least embellishing old rumors. But seeing as how the setting lent itself so well to such tales, I allowed myself to buy into it. One afternoon, we decided to play hide and seek. When it was my turn to hide, I ran off for a flimsy brown barn that had living quarters on top, and climbed the stairs looking for a good spot. There was still furniture inside, and personal belongings lay scattered across the floor. I maneuvered over broken dishes, tattered clothes, and crumbling books, eventually coming to a small room with a closet. Jackpot. There were even long black dresses still hanging on the rod that I could hide behind. I stepped inside and managed to force shut the folding door. My only illumination was a slit of sunlight that shone through the crack in the door from a nearby window. I crouched down with knees tucked into chest and waited. Some time passed and there was still no sign of my seekers. I waited some more, debating if and when I should give myself up. After nearly an hour, this was starting to get boring. My head drooped. I woke with a jerk. It was pitch black. Drowsy and confused, I forgot for a minute where I was or what I had been doing. As it came back to me, the realization that it was now nighttime and that I had been abandoned here filled me with sinking dread in the pit of my stomach. I tried to get up, but a sudden cramp in my calf kept me grounded. I squirmed about, waiting for it to pass, when I heard a door slamming shut downstairs, and instantly froze. One of my cousins? There was a brief period of silence, then footsteps at the bottom of the stairs. But not just footsteps, a thud too. After every other step. These weren't the footfalls of a child. They were slow, heavy, deliberate. I held my breath, praying they would go away. They did not. The noises continued to ascend. After another moment of silence, the walking resumed. This time along with a steady scraping sound, like something heavy being dragged across the floorboards. The footsteps made their way through the debris and wandered aimlessly through the various rooms. I thought I could smell something faintly putrid. The constant scrape sent cold shivers coursing down my arms and back. My worst fears were realized when the steps reached the bedroom doorway. They got closer and closer and finally stopped directly in front of the closet door. I couldn't see a thing. After an agonizing pause, they continued on, over to the other side of the room and out the doorway again. They faded away down the hallway. I waited for what seemed like an eternity. There were no more sounds now, and I was trying to build up enough courage to open the door and flee. 3 things happened simultaneously just then. I was bombarded with a smell I can only describe as fresh roadkill. I heard raspy breathing behind me in the dark closet, and I felt hot breath against the nape of my neck. That was enough for me to hurtle myself out from the confines of that nightmare space, relying on memory and scant moonlight to navigate through the darkened house. All the while, I heard footsteps chasing behind me, closing in with terrifying speed. It was a clumsy, torturous escape full of trips and bumps and blind stumbling. I never looked back. At least, not until I had burst out the front door and into the country night. And when I did turn around, I saw absolutely nothing. There were no more footsteps and nobody was chasing me. That didn't stop me from running, though, all the way back to my aunt and uncle's house. There was a police car in the driveway when I got back. My parents were there too, worried sick. Everybody demanded to know where I had been. Apparently, when my cousins still hadn't found me by evening, they'd returned home to tell their parents. Eventually, the police were called in and informed me that they had already scoured every building on the farm. The insinuation that I was lying about my whereabouts didn't go unnoticed. None of it made any sense. It wasn't until years later that one of my cousins filled in a final piece of the story. He and his brothers had spent hours searching for me like they said. But the part they didn't tell anyone was that they thought they spotted me in the window of the bedroom I was hiding in. And when they got closer, they saw that it wasn't me. A young boy neither of them recognized was smiling and waving down at them and gesturing for them to come upstairs. That's when they ran back home. All of this while I slept in the closet.
There, and we'll continue tomorrow after I come out of school. So peace and have a wonderful day.